Her name was Alicia Monroe, 38 years old, criminal defense attorney, known in her circles for being unflinchingly calm. She believed in the system, not because it was perfect, but because she had to. Every day she stood in front of juries and said, "Justice still works if we demand it to." It was more than a belief, it was survival. That morning had started like any other. She'd been running late, juggling case files, half a bagel in her mouth, phone on speaker as her paralegal reminded her of the docket. Her client, a teenage boy accused of resisting arrest, was scheduled first. She had spent weeks digging through bodicam footage, fighting to prove he never resisted at all. As she hurried through the metal detectors, she nodded to the security staff. Some nodded back, others didn't. But when she rounded the corner and brushed past Sergeant Harris, her life changed in one violent heartbeat. Alicia steadied herself, papers scattered across the polished floor. She gathered them slowly, deliberately, refusing to let her shaking fingers betray her. No one moved to help. Not the clerks, not the officers by the scanner, not even the bailiff standing a few feet away. The silence was a verdict all its own. Then came the voice from the back, a young intern, whispering, "Someone record this." Phones rose like witnesses. Harris's smirk widened for a moment, but when he saw the camera lens on him, something flickered, hesitation. Still, he didn't apologize, didn't step back. He straightened his belt, rolled his shoulders, and walked away like nothing had happened. Alicia stayed frozen, not from fear, but from the understanding that this moment would follow her. Every injustice she had ever defended someone from had just touched her skin. By noon, the video had hit social media. By 2, it was trending. 15 seconds, that's all it took. 15 seconds to turn a courthouse hallway into a battlefield for the soul of the justice system. News anchors called it an unfortunate altercation. The police department called it a misunderstanding. But anyone who watched the footage knew what it was, an officer's unchecked rage meeting a woman's quiet dignity. That night, Alicia sat alone in her apartment, face lit by the glow of her laptop. Her phone vibrated nonstop, messages from colleagues, journalists, even old law school friends. One text read, "Alicia, don't file a complaint. You'll lose your license before he loses his badge." Another said, "Be careful, he's connected. You don't want this fight." She stared at the messages, then at the paused video on her screen. Harris's hand mid-swing, her head turned just slightly. She could almost feel the echo of it in her bones. That's when she whispered to herself, barely audible, "No more silence." The next morning, she walked into internal affairs with a file under her arm. Inside, a printed complaint, her statement, the viral video, and a photo of her bruised cheek. The clerk behind the desk looked up, startled. "You're filing against Sergeant Harris." Alicia nodded. "You sure about that?" he asked. "I'm sure," she said, voice steady. Her hands didn't shake as she signed her name. Outside, reporters waited like vultures in the winter air. Microphones, cameras, flashbulbs. Alicia stopped on the courthouse steps. For a moment, she thought about keeping quiet, about retreating into the shadows like so many others had done. But she lifted her chin, looked straight into the nearest camera, and said, "This isn't just about me. It's about what happens when those sworn to protect the law believe they are above it." Within days, whispers started. Emails went missing. Her office printer broke mysteriously. A police cruiser idled across from her apartment 3 nights in a row. Colleagues who had once smiled at her in the hallway now avoided her gaze. Her clients were suddenly reassigned. The system was closing ranks. One afternoon, her mentor, Judge Evelyn Torres, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and eyes sharp as glass, called her into chambers. "Alicia," she said softly, "do you know what you're doing?" "I do. This could destroy your career." "Then so be it." Judge Torres leaned forward, voice low. "Justice isn't a straight line. It bends under pressure. Sometimes it breaks. Be careful what you try to straighten. People will see it as rebellion." Alicia met her gaze. "Then let them." 2 weeks later, the department announced a disciplinary review hearing, public, mandatory, and scheduled in the same courthouse where it all began. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Neither was the tension. News vans lined the street that morning. Protesters held signs that read "Accountability for all" and "No badge above the law." Inside, cameras pointed toward the entrance, waiting for the 2 names that had become headlines, Sergeant Blake Harris, and Attorney Alicia Monroe. When Harris arrived, he smirked at the flashing lights. He looked untouchable, confident, calm, surrounded by fellow officers who clapped him on the shoulder. He whispered to his lawyer, then took a seat at the defense table. But Alicia hadn't arrived yet. Down the hallway, in a quiet side room, Alicia stood before a mirror. Her reflection stared back, steady, but weary. Her cheek had healed, but the memory hadn't. On the counter beside her sat her old law school pin, a small piece of silver engraved with the scales of justice. She picked it up, turning it over in her fingers. Her phone buzzed, a message from Judge Torres. "Come in strong. The world is watching." She smiled faintly, slipped the pin into her pocket, and walked out the door. The hearing room filled with murmurs as the bailiff's voice echoed, "All rise." Everyone stood, but the door at the side of the courtroom remained closed for a beat too long. Then, it opened, and the room gasped. Alicia Monroe stepped through, not in her Navy attorney's suit, but in a judge's robe, black, crisp, commanding. The gavel gleamed in her hand like a symbol reborn. She took the bench, the same room where she'd been humiliated, the same walls that had watched her be struck, and now, she sat above them all. Harris's smirk faltered, the cameras clicked, reporters whispered, even the air seemed to hesitate. When Alicia finally spoke, her voice carried through the room like a bell. "Good morning," she said. "I'll be presiding over this hearing today." Harris's lawyer stood halfway, stammering, "Your Honor, this can't." Alicia raised a hand. "Sit down, counselor. You'll have your turn." And just like that, the balance of power shifted. That day, the world saw something rare, a reversal that felt like justice itself had risen from the ashes of humiliation. But behind Alicia's calm expression was something deeper, the knowledge that this wasn't over. Because for every slap that gets caught on camera, there are 100 more that don't. And now, she wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for all of them. If you were in Alicia's place at that moment, standing before the man who struck you, would you have taken the bench, or walked away? I've spent hours researching and crafting this story so you could experience it like you were there. If you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, please subscribe, it really helps me keep telling them for you. The courthouse steps were still wet from rain when Alicia arrived the next morning. Camera crews were already waiting, a wall of microphones, lenses, and flashing lights. Judge Monroe, how does it feel to preside over your own assault case? Do you think you can stay impartial? Is this justice, or revenge? The questions came like bullets, each one crafted to wound. Alicia kept walking, black robes billowing behind her. She didn't respond, because she knew any word could be twisted into a weapon. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Reporters lined the benches. Harris sat at the defense table, his posture perfect, eyes burning holes through her. He looked calm, collected, but beneath that, there was something else, fear pretending to be arrogance. When the bailiff announced the start of the hearing, Alicia tapped the gavel once. The sound echoed like thunder. "Proceed," she said. The first witness was a young clerk who'd been in the hallway that morning, nervous, pale, hands trembling as he took the oath. "Tell us what you saw," Alicia said. He swallowed hard. "I saw Sergeant Harris raise his hand and slap her." "Did she provoke him?" "No, ma'am. She apologized before he hit her." The defense attorney rose. "Objection, leading." Alicia turned calmly. "Overruled." "Continue." The clerk hesitated. "After he hit her, everyone froze. No one said anything." "Why?" Alicia asked softly. "Because he was a cop." Those words landed heavy. Harris's jaw flexed. The courtroom whispered. Alicia leaned back slightly, feeling the weight of that truth. She'd heard it 100 times before, but hearing it from someone else made it real again. By afternoon, the defense shifted tactics. Their attorney, a polished man named Victor Lang, stood with a smirk that matched Harris's own. "Your Honor," he began, "we'd like to enter into evidence the disciplinary record of Ms. Monroe prior to her judicial appointment." The crowd murmured. Alicia's heart thudded once, hard. She knew what was coming. Victor held up a folder. "In this record, we find several complaints filed against Ms. Monroe, accusations of bias against law enforcement, inflammatory remarks in closing arguments, and repeated motions alleging police misconduct. Doesn't that suggest she has a personal agenda?" He looked up at her, eyes gleaming with provocation. He wanted her to lose her cool, to react, to prove his point. Alicia kept her voice level. "This is not about my history. It's about Sergeant Harris's actions." Victor smiled. "Oh, but perception matters, doesn't it, Judge? The public might see this entire proceeding as a vendetta, not justice." Harris sat back, arms crossed, that smirk returning. Alicia could feel every eye in the room pressing down on her. For a moment, she wanted to shout, to tell them what it meant to be humiliated and then questioned for seeking fairness, but she didn't. Instead, she simply said, "Mr. Lang, if you have evidence relevant to the assault itself, present it." Otherwise, this line of questioning is over. The gavel struck, sharp, controlled, but her hand trembled just slightly. That night, the whisper campaign began. An anonymous email circulated among courthouse staff, hinting that Alicia's appointment was politically motivated, that she'd been fast-tracked by activists, that she was a danger to judicial integrity. Cable news anchors debated it like sport. Was this justice, or a power grab? One host asked. Another responded, she's clearly biased. You can't hit a cop and then make her judge him. No one corrected the lie. The truth didn't trend. The outrage did. Alicia watched from her couch, the TV light flickering across her face. Her phone buzzed again. Dozens of unread messages. Some were kind. Most were not. Step down, lady. You're embarrassing the bench. Play victim somewhere else. He should have hit you harder. She turned the phone face down and sat in silence. The city outside her window was asleep, but she could feel its judgment breathing through the walls. 3 days later, a man from the governor's office requested a quiet conversation. They met in a small cafe 2 blocks from the courthouse. He wore a suit too sharp for the setting, his smile rehearsed. Alicia, he began, stirring his coffee. You've become quite the headline. I didn't ask to be one. He nodded. I know, but headlines come with consequences. The governor is under pressure, the police union, donors, certain committees. They're not happy, because I'm doing my job, because you're making waves. He leaned closer. Look, off the record, they want you to recuse yourself. Step down gracefully. They'll frame it as professionalism, not defeat. Alicia stared at him. And if I don't, he sighed, then they'll find another way to make it happen. That night, Alicia went for a walk through the city. The air was cool, street lights reflecting off puddles, traffic humming in the distance. She stopped outside the courthouse, staring up at the stone facade, the same place that had both broken and rebuilt her life. She remembered being a little girl, watching her mother cry in a police station after her brother was wrongfully arrested. She'd promised herself that day that she'd fight to make the system better, and now the system wanted her gone. She whispered under her breath, you can't fix what you're afraid to face. The wind carried the words away, but she felt their weight stay in her chest. The next morning, the hearing continued. This time, Harris himself took the stand. He raised his right hand, took the oath, and sat down, posture perfect, face blank. Alicia's voice was calm. Sergeant Harris, do you recall the morning in question? Yes, Your Honor. Did you strike me? He hesitated. I made contact during a security misunderstanding. Made contact, she repeated, with an open hand, across the face, in front of witnesses. He shrugged slightly. It was reflexive. She startled me. The courtroom tensed. Did I threaten you? She asked. No. Did I raise my voice? No. So what, exactly, startled you? Harris looked her in the eye. Your tone. A murmur rippled through the audience. Alicia leaned forward just slightly. My tone? Yes, he said. You spoke down to me. Alicia's voice dropped to a whisper. Officer, I was holding case files. I said, sorry, officer, that's all. He smirked. Exactly. The arrogance in his tone was like acid on skin. He wanted her to snap, to make her look unfit, but she simply looked down at her notes and said, no further questions. Inside, though, a storm was building. During recess, Alicia overheard 2 officers whispering near the vending machines. They'll never fire him, one said. Internal said it's already decided. The union's backing him. She's just there to make it look fair. She froze mid-step. Decided. Before the hearing even ended, the system had already written its verdict. That night, she met with Judge Torres again. They sat in Torres's office, surrounded by shelves of old law books. You can't outvote a machine, Torres said quietly, but you can expose it. Alicia frowned. How? Torres slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents, complaints from other citizens, sealed cases involving Harris, patterns of excessive force, all buried under administrative resolution. Someone's been covering for him, Torres said, for years. Alicia felt her pulse quicken. Can we use this? Torres shook her head. Not yet. It's sealed. But if it leaks, she looked up, then it's no longer hidden. 2 nights later, the documents surfaced online. An anonymous source, later rumored to be someone inside the judiciary, had released Harris's record. 23 complaints, 7 investigations, 0 disciplinary actions. The city erupted. Protests filled the streets again, louder this time. The police union called it a smear campaign, but people had seen enough. They weren't demanding explanations anymore, they were demanding accountability. Inside the courthouse, Harris sat stone-faced as the press swarmed him. His lawyer barked, "No comment," but the damage was done. That evening, Alicia received a call from the governor's office. The voice was cold now. "Judge Monroe, do you have any knowledge of how those files were leaked?" "I don't," she said truthfully, "because if this traces back to your chambers, it won't just be a scandal, it'll be grounds for removal." Alicia said nothing. She knew how this game worked. They couldn't beat her on integrity, so they'd try to break her on procedure. When the call ended, she sat in the darkness for a long time, the city lights flickering across her desk. For the first time in weeks, she felt something close to fear, but under it was resolve. The next day, Harris cornered her in the courthouse parking lot. "You think you've won," he said, voice low, dangerous. Alicia turned, meeting his glare. "This isn't about winning," she said. He stepped closer. "You don't get it, do you? People like me run this place. You're just passing through." Alicia didn't flinch. "Then you'd better get used to the view from below." He laughed, dark and bitter. "You'll regret this." Alicia stepped past him, her heels echoing on the pavement. She didn't look back. That evening, the story broke nationwide. Officer accused of courthouse assault now facing misconduct allegations. The public opinion flipped overnight. Where there had been doubt, there was now outrage. Where there had been whispers, there were now chants. Alicia watched it unfold with quiet disbelief. For the first time, the tide felt like it might finally turn, but deep down, she knew, this wasn't victory. It was the eye of the storm. The courthouse was chaos. Security doubled. Reporters shouted questions over the barricades. Inside, staff whispered in corners like conspirators. The leak of Sergeant Harris's record had shaken the foundation of the department, and no one knew how deep the rot went. Alicia arrived quietly, her robe folded over her arm. She didn't make eye contact with anyone. Every look felt like an accusation. "You did this." When she stepped into her chambers, her assistant, Mariah, stood waiting, phone in hand. "Judge Monroe," she said nervously, "you need to see this." On the screen was a new headline. "Anonymous whistleblower claims more officers protected in internal cover-up." Alicia frowned. "More officers?" Mariah nodded. "It's not just Harris. There's a list." Alicia's heart sank. This wasn't one man's corruption, it was a network. Later that afternoon, as Alicia prepared for the next day's hearing, a courier arrived. Plain envelope, no return address, just her name, handwritten in blue ink. Inside were photocopies of memos, internal emails from the district attorney's office, subject lines like "handle quietly and no press involvement," and one that made her stop cold. "Harris has friends in the tower. Keep him safe." Attached at the bottom, an unsigned note. "They buried the real reports. Check storage room B12, basement level." Alicia looked up. Storage B12 was restricted, evidence overflow, archives, and forgotten files. She knew because she'd once worked there as an intern. That evening, long after court adjourned and the building emptied, Alicia took the elevator down. The basement smelled of dust and paper, the kind of air that carried secrets. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead as she walked past endless rows of shelves, boxes marked closed cases and archive only. She found the door. B12, authorized personnel only. Her badge wouldn't scan. She hesitated, then pulled a small pin from her hair, a habit she'd never lost from her defense days, and jimmied the lock. The latch clicked open. Inside, filing cabinets, a metal desk, and rows of storage boxes labeled with case numbers. She flipped through one labeled Disciplinary Reports, 2009 to 2019. There it was, Harris, Blake Confidential. She opened it. Inside were printed complaints, statements, even audio transcripts. One in particular stood out, from a woman named Tanya Brooks, a public defender who had accused Harris of harassment and intimidation in 2017. The report was marked closed, allegation unsubstantiated, but someone had underlined her signature, and beside it, scribbled, "She withdrew. Family threatened." Alicia's throat tightened. Then, footsteps, heavy, slow, getting closer. She froze. The light under the door shifted, a shadow. Someone was in the hallway. The handle turned once, then stopped. After a long pause, the footsteps retreated. Alicia waited 5 full minutes before slipping out. When she finally reached her car, her hands were shaking. The next morning, a woman showed up outside Alicia's chambers. Late 40s, worn eyes, professional suit. "My name's Tanya Brooks," she said. "You found my file." Alicia blinked. "How did you?" "I heard about the leak," Tanya said. "It's time someone knew what really happened." They sat down in Alicia's office, blinds closed. Tanya spoke quietly, voice trembling at first. "I filed that report against Harris 8 years ago," she said. "He followed me to my car one night after court, told me to watch my mouth about the force, said he could make my life disappear." Alicia's chest tightened. "What happened then?" "I went to internal affairs. The next day, my husband got pulled over. They searched our house, said they got an anonymous tip about drugs." Tanya shook her head. "There was nothing, but my son was terrified, so I withdrew the complaint." She looked up, eyes glassy. "I've carried that shame for years. When I saw you stand up to him, I had to tell someone." Alicia reached across the desk, her voice soft but steady. "You just did." With Tanya's testimony and the basement files, Alicia began connecting dots. Each complaint against Harris had followed the same cycle: incident, intimidation, withdrawal, closure. Different victims, same outcome, and each closure form bore the same signature: Captain Alan Reese, head of internal affairs, and Harris's former partner. The system wasn't failing, it was protecting itself. That night, as Alicia organized the evidence, Mariah burst into her office. "Judge Monroe, you need to see this." She turned the monitor toward Alicia. "An email from the Judicial Oversight Committee, effective immediately. An emergency review has been initiated regarding your recent conduct and possible ethical violations. Please prepare to appear before the panel within 72 hours. Alicia exhaled slowly. "They're coming for me." Mariah's voice cracked. "What are you going to do?" Alicia looked down at the evidence spread across her desk. Files, names, patterns, truth. "I'm going to make sure they can't bury this again." Later that night, a knock on her office door. It was Judge Torres. She stepped inside quietly, closing the door behind her. "You've stirred up the hornet's nest," she said. "They're trying to remove me," Alicia replied. Torres nodded. "They won't stop there." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small flash drive. "This," she said, "is from an old case I handled. Reese's unit. I think you'll want to see it." Alicia plugged it into her laptop. A video appeared. Bodycam footage from 2015. A domestic disturbance call. Harris and Reese on scene. At minute 3, Harris shoved his suspect to the ground, then turned off his camera. But Reese's camera stayed on, angled just enough to catch what happened next. Harris striking the unarmed man, then saying, "Turn that off, partner. We don't need another complaint." Reese's voice replied, "Already done." Alicia stared at the screen, frozen. Proof. Finally, proof. The next morning, Alicia filed a motion to admit new evidence. The video, the basement files, Tanya's testimony, all of it. The courtroom buzzed like an electrical current. Harris's lawyer shouted, "Your Honor, this is a smear campaign. This evidence was obtained illegally." Alicia met his gaze. "It was obtained truthfully," he sneered. "You've compromised your own impartiality." She leaned forward, voice low but firm. "Impartiality doesn't mean blindness." The audience murmured. Even the reporters seemed to sense something shifting, the current of power, the fragile crack forming in the wall of protection. That night, Alicia's car alarm went off. When she stepped outside, her tires were slashed. On her windshield, a note: "Drop the case, or next time, it's not your car." She stared at it under the streetlight, rain soaking her hair. Fear tried to find her, but rage found her first. She folded the note, tucked it into her coat pocket, and whispered, "You just proved my case." 2 days later, Alicia stood before the Judicial Oversight Committee, a semicircle of stern faces, cameras flashing behind them. "Judge Monroe," the chairwoman said, "you're accused of violating protocol, compromising your impartiality, and leaking confidential information. How do you plead?" Alicia took a breath. "I plead guilty to caring about justice more than comfort." The room rustled. She continued, voice steady, deliberate. "This isn't about me. It's about a culture that protects power at the expense of truth. You can remove me, you can ruin my career, but what you can't do anymore is pretend you don't know." Silence. Heavy. Electric. Even the cameras seemed to hold still. Then, from the back of the room, a voice. "She's right." It was Tanya Brooks, standing. Then another voice joined her, and another. Public defenders, clerks, even one uniformed officer. Within seconds, the chamber filled with a rising murmur of solidarity. The committee chair tapped the gavel. "Order, order." But the order was gone. The truth had entered the room, and it wasn't leaving. That night, the footage leaked again, this time from an anonymous account that posted both the 2015 video and excerpts from the oversight hearing. By morning, it had millions of views. Headlines exploded. Bodycam footage exposes years of misconduct. Judge under fire reveals corruption network. Governor calls for immediate investigation. And for the first time since this began, Sergeant Blake Harris didn't show up for court. A warrant was issued. His house was empty. His badge, found on the table. Alicia sat alone in her chambers, the gavel resting beside her. The sun was rising, gold light spilling across stacks of files and empty coffee cups. Her phone buzzed, a message from Judge Torres. They're calling for a statewide review. You did it. But Alicia didn't smile, because she knew, truth has a price. She was already hearing rumors that she'd be suspended pending review. Her judicial future uncertain. Her safety, even more so. Yet, for the first time, she felt peace. Because what began with a slap had become something much louder. 3 days after the warrant was issued, Harris was still missing. Rumors swirled through the city. He'd fled the state. He was being hidden by fellow officers. He'd gone underground. The department denied it all, but the silence said otherwise. Alicia watched the coverage from her office, exhausted. Her desk was littered with court memos, investigation requests, and subpoenas. Her name, once whispered with suspicion, now carried a strange mix of awe and danger. The governor had announced a task force for judicial integrity, and every reporter wanted a quote from the woman who started it. But Alicia didn't want fame. She wanted closure. Then, one morning, it came, in the form of a phone call. Judge Monroe, said a voice she didn't recognize. This is Detective Ryan Cho. We've located Sergeant Harris. Alicia's pulse slowed. Where? An abandoned training site on the east side. He wants to turn himself in, but only if you're present. Her heart pounded. That's not protocol. No, Cho said, but he asked for you by name. The training facility sat at the edge of the city, chain-link fences, peeling paint, the ghost of authority lingering in the air. When Alicia arrived, officers surrounded the building. Harris stood near a squad car, hands cuffed, head bowed. He looked smaller now, the uniform gone, the swagger drained from his face. As she stepped closer, he looked up. Guess you won, he muttered. Alicia studied him quietly. There are no winners here, she said, only consequences. He laughed once, bitter, empty. You really think they care about any of this? They'll pin it all on me, call me a bad apple, then go back to business as usual. She didn't deny it. Maybe, she said, but you were the one who made the choice to swing first. He smirked faintly. You think you changed anything? Alicia's voice was steady. I changed the silence. He looked away, jaw tight. For the first time, she saw not power, but the emptiness that breeds it. The officers led him away, and as the car door shut, the echo of the lock felt like a closing chapter, but only one. 2 weeks later, the state convened a public tribunal, broadcast live, attended by community leaders, officers, judges, and citizens. It wasn't just about Harris anymore. It was about every hidden case, every buried report, every abuse stamped resolved. Alicia sat at the center table as a witness, not a judge this time. Across from her, Captain Alan Reese, head of internal affairs, the man whose signature had closed every one of Harris's complaints. When his name was called, Reese walked in confidently. Years of command still clung to his shoulders. The chairwoman spoke first. Captain Reese, do you acknowledge that you signed off on over 20 disciplinary closures involving Sergeant Blake Harris? Yes, ma'am, he said. All were properly investigated. Alicia leaned forward. Even the ones with corroborating video evidence. He paused. Those were reviewed under departmental discretion. And the witness reports that disappeared from those files. His jaw twitched. Procedural error. Alicia's tone sharpened. 23 procedural errors, all benefiting the same officer? That's not error, Captain. That's protection. Reese met her gaze with cold irritation. You don't understand how it works, Judge. We keep the peace. We protect the image of the force. If that image falls, the city burns. Alicia's voice dropped to a whisper, the kind that made the room lean in. You were never protecting peace. You were protecting power. One by one, victims stepped forward. A teenage boy, her first client, now a young man, told how Harris had pulled him from a car and accused him of resisting. Tanya Brooks told her story again, this time on record, tears trembling down her cheeks. A clerk described seeing files deleted from the system, each testimony layered like a drumbeat, slow, relentless, undeniable. By the time the last witness finished, the room was silent, the silence of disbelief, turning into awakening. When Reese returned to the stand for questioning, something in him cracked. He started defensive, then evasive, then angry. You people think you can just rewrite the rules, he barked. Do you have any idea what happens when you take the power away from men like Harris? You lose control. Alicia stood slowly. Maybe control isn't what we need. Maybe we need accountability. Reese's voice broke into a shout. Accountability doesn't keep officers alive on the street. Neither does corruption. Alicia snapped, her voice rising for the first time. The room jolted. The chairwoman banged the gavel. Order. But the damage was done. For the first time, Reese looked shaken, the mask slipping, the old logic turning to dust. He slumped back into his chair, whispering something under his breath that sounded like surrender. After 3 days of hearings, the tribunal delivered its decision. Harris, stripped of rank, charged with assault, perjury, and misconduct. Reese, forced into retirement, under federal investigation. The department, ordered to release 10 years of sealed disciplinary records. The city erupted, not in riots this time, in applause, in tears, in something rare, relief. Outside the courthouse, crowds gathered as Alicia walked down the steps. For weeks, she had been a symbol of controversy. Now, she was a symbol of courage. Reporters shouted questions, but she didn't answer. Instead, she paused at the bottom of the steps, looked back at the courthouse, and whispered, "This is what justice sounds like." But victories never clean. Behind the cameras, the governor's aides argued over optics. The department scrambled to control the narrative. Some said Alicia had embarrassed the system. Others said she'd saved its soul. Late that night, she met again with Judge Torres in chambers. "They'll try to discredit you," Torres warned. "They'll dig, spin, twist. They always do." Alicia nodded. "Let them. I don't serve them." Torres smiled faintly. "No, you serve the law. That's what scares them." A month later, Harris appeared in court for sentencing. He'd pled guilty to the assault, but refused to cooperate with a broader corruption probe. When the judge asked if he had any final words, he hesitated. Then he looked across the room, at Alicia, seated quietly among the observers. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said slowly, "but I want to say this. I used to think strength meant control. It doesn't. It means knowing when you're wrong." He looked down, "And I was wrong." The judge nodded once. "Sentence will be served in full." As the gavel dropped, the sound was clean, final, like the echo of a promise finally kept. After court adjourned, Alicia walked alone through the corridor, the same one where the slap had once echoed. She stopped in the exact spot, ran her hand along the smooth marble wall, and remembered, not just the pain, but the silence that followed, and how, piece by piece, she'd broken it. A young intern passed by, holding files against her chest. She looked up nervously. "Judge Monroe," she asked, "is it true what they say, that one voice can really change the system?" Alicia smiled softly. "One voice can start the echo," she said, "but it takes many to make it last." Weeks later, the story faded from the headlines. New scandals, new outrage. But something had shifted in the city, subtle, yet real. Complaints were now logged publicly, Bodicum policies rewritten, the oversight board, no longer a formality, and in offices, classrooms, and homes, people whispered her name not as controversy, but as courage. Late one evening, Alicia sat in her chambers packing up her desk. Her temporary term as interim judge was ending. Whether she'd be reappointed, no one knew. She paused over one item, her gavel, the same one she'd held that first day, when power had finally tilted her way. She turned it over in her hands. The wood was worn now, smoothed by months of battles. She placed it gently in the drawer and whispered, "You did your part." Then she turned off the lights and stepped out, leaving the room bathed in quiet dignity. This is what became of Alicia Monroe, and the city that finally listened. Spring had come early that year. The courthouse steps, once the stage for protest and press, now shimmered under sunlight. The air felt lighter, as if the city had exhaled after holding its breath for too long. Inside, the halls looked the same, marble floors, echoing voices, the faint smell of coffee and paper, but something had changed in the people. Clerks greeted one another differently now. Officers nodded instead of sneering. Even the air of intimidation that had haunted those quarters felt weaker, almost embarrassed. Alicia Monroe had returned, not in robes, but in plain clothes. Her term as interim judge had ended, but her influence had not. She now led the Office of Legal Accountability, a new department created by the governor's reform bill. Its mission, to review past misconduct cases, reopen buried complaints, and ensure transparency. The office was small, 10 people, 3 desks, and a mountain of old files, but to Alicia, it felt like a cathedral. "Every file is a story," she told her team on their first day, "and every story deserves to be heard again, properly this time." the walls filled with photos of victims, newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes from citizens who'd followed her case. At the center, one message stood out: "Because of you, I finally reported him." She'd read that one more than any other. Outside the courthouse, the movement Alicia had sparked lived on. Student-led rallies turned into civic panels. Protest chants became policy workshops. Law schools began teaching a new seminar, Justice and Power, the Monroe Doctrine. Tanya Brooks, the woman whose bruises had started it all, now led a community legal aid center, offering free counsel to those afraid of retaliation. When Alicia visited, Tanya hugged her tightly. "You didn't just stand up for me," she said. "You stood up for what they said didn't exist: fairness." Alicia smiled, tears welling. "It existed," she said. "It just needed witnesses." But change came with a cost. Alicia's personal life had quietly unraveled during the storm. Her fiancé, Marcus, a journalist, had supported her through the hearings, but the constant threats and public attention had worn him thin. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching dusk settle, he turned to her. "You know I love what you've done," he said gently, "but I miss who you were before all this." She didn't have an answer, because she wasn't that person anymore. He left 2 months later, not in anger, but in exhaustion. Sometimes victory takes more than the fight itself. Sometimes it takes what you didn't know you'd lose. Later that year, the governor hosted an event marking 1 year since the Monroe decision, the reform package inspired by her case. Alicia attended reluctantly. She preferred quiet work to spotlights. As she entered the ballroom, applause rippled across the room. Reporters whispered her name again, but this time, it wasn't scandal, it was reverence. The governor took the stage. "Courage isn't the absence of fear," he said. "It's doing what's right when the world is watching, and when it isn't." Judge Monroe reminded us all of that. When Alicia was called up to speak, she hesitated for a moment, then approached the podium. She looked out at the crowd, politicians, officers, activists, ordinary people, and said softly, "When the slap happened, people asked me how it felt to be humiliated. But humiliation wasn't the worst part. The worst part was realizing how quiet the room became. Silence is what feeds injustice. So if I've learned anything this year, it's this: never be the one who stays silent." The room stood in thunderous applause, but Alicia didn't smile. She just nodded once, like someone honoring the dead before walking back to work. Months later, a letter arrived at her office. No return address, no official stamp, just her name, handwritten in rough, uneven letters. Inside was a single page. "I saw your speech. You were right. Silence feeds injustice. I'm learning that now. I've started mentoring younger inmates. Some of them remind me of the people I hurt. I don't expect redemption, but I'm trying to understand what it means." Alicia folded the letter slowly and placed it in her drawer, next to her old gavel. Forgiveness wasn't the point, but acknowledgement, that mattered. One afternoon, Alicia was invited to speak at a local law school. The lecture hall was packed, students standing along the walls, notebooks open, eyes wide. She began without pretense. "When I was your age," she said, "I thought justice was a verdict. Now I know it's a process, one you have to guard every day, because power doesn't sleep, it just waits." A student raised her hand. "Judge Monroe, if you could go back, would you still press charges, still risk everything?" Alicia paused. The question hung heavy in the air. Then she smiled faintly. "Yes," she said, "because sometimes, doing the right thing isn't about winning, it's about refusing to lose yourself." A year later, the Judicial Council voted to make her appointment permanent. The news broke quietly, no headlines this time, no uproar, just an announcement. Alicia Monroe confirmed as Superior Court judge. The morning she returned to the bench, the courtroom felt different, not because of the furniture or the robes, but because of the weight of memory. As she raised her gavel for the first time again, she thought of every person who'd been silenced before her, and as it struck wood, the sound wasn't just procedural, it was ceremonial, like a vow renewed. That evening, Alicia walked alone through the courthouse one last time. The halls were quiet, the echoes soft. She stopped by the window overlooking the city, lights blinking like stars that refused to die. For the first time in months, she let herself breathe deeply. She thought about everything that had happened: the slap, the shame, the silence, the roar that followed, and how justice, fragile as it was, had found its way through. She whispered to the reflection in the glass, "We built something out of brokenness." Behind her, the night janitor, a kind, older man, paused and said, "Ma'am, if you don't mind me saying, the city's different now. People talk different, act different. Feels like you gave it its voice back." Alicia smiled softly. I didn't give it back, she said. I just reminded them it was theirs all along. What lesson do you think the world should learn from Alicia Monroe's story? Thank you for listening till the end. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something, please subscribe and share it. It helps me keep bringing you the stories that matter most. The stories that remind us justice still lives, one voice at a time.